we've made the point on a number of occasions that the product market position that an organisation and its workforce face represent an absolutely fundamental constraint on the kinds of decisions that they can make in relation to reward. That what an organisation can afford is the basic limit about what we can decide to do in the design of a reward system. There is a broader point to be made about the nature of product markets, and that is that product markets have changed fundamentally over the past few decades in a way which represents a huge secular shift in the relationship between employers and employees within organisations, and poses an enormous challenge to the market position of employees, and has been a fundamental reason why unions have faced increasing problems in raising the competitive position of their workforce in a way that they might have done in earlier periods of time. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just thinking about what some of those limits might be. So product markets are absolutely fundamental. So the development of product markets has a major impact upon the way in which employers and employees work with each other, about how they relate to each other, about how they bargain with each other, about how pay is set within that relationship. So if we think back to fairly primitive economic periods where economic activity took place within a local labour market, that an organisation existed in a locality, they employed people from that locality, and they sold their goods and services within that locality. So all of the relationships within that, all of the market dynamics and everything happened within that local element. Now, for unions to operate in that kind of situation, all that was required of them to do would be to organise the local labour market, to make sure that all of the potential employees for that organisation within that locality were part of the union, and then they could bargain on their behalf. Now, in that kind of very closed system, for the union to negotiate for higher wages on the part of their members, then the organisation would have to either be able to absorb those costs through reducing margins or whatever, or to pass on those additional costs to their customers. And if that was a very closed system and there weren't any competitors within the area, that was quite possible, and the customers would simply have to take on those additional costs. Now, it's quite possible that a lot of those customers would also be employees of the organisation, so the thing became kind of self-supporting. But the point being that in those kinds of closed systems where everything happens within a locality, there's no interference from the outside, organisations and their workforces and their unions could engage in this process where they effectively collude with each other in order to raise wages of employees and pass that cost on to customers. Now, product markets didn't stay local. They evolved into being regional and then national markets. Now, for unions to be able to operate in a similar way, once we have national product markets, they have to expand their operation. They have to become national organisations. And so we see the development of unions over this period to merge local unions, to set up national institutions, and to work very hard to be able to organise the whole market. If they're not successful in being able to do that, in order to organise every part of the market, they run the risk of bargaining in the unionised sector simply leading to a loss of unionised jobs, because their employers, the employers of their members, simply become uncompetitive. So they have to organise the whole of the relevant product market so that all of the employers in that market raise their costs and they raise their prices in return. Similarly, a strike action in the unionised sector simply transfers demand from the unionised sector of the market into the non-union sector. So we see this shift in the development of product markets resulting in a shift in union organisation behaviour. Employers often went along with this kind of activity, this desire to take wages out of competition, that they would effectively collude with their product market competitors. And the reason why they would do this, why they would slashing costs where possible, taking on unions and not playing part of this game, was because they saw huge benefits of taking this potentially volatile, conflict-ridden employment issue out of the relationship that they had with their unions. Now, of course, that didn't happen all the time, but to a large extent, where there were national collective bargaining situations, wages were agreed across the whole industry, so where there was a wage increase, it applied to everybody in that industry. The wages went up, conflict resolved, maybe the costs were higher to consumers, but it was broadly seen as a win, that employees, the unions, employers were colluded effectively against the consumer of the product in question. Now, there are lots of advantages for this kind of approach. Very good for union members because it means that they can enjoy higher standards of living. They're effectively operating a monopoly in this market, and so they have the benefit of charging what are called rents in this kind of situation. The union members get their share of the rents. Good for employers because they don't have the conflict that would be associated with local bargaining, and if the labour markets get tight with their employees moving backwards and forwards from one employer to the other, trying to bid up their wages in that way. So it established stability and got rid of conflict and established a basis for effective cooperative employment relations. Some benefits for the consumer in this as well. The consumer wasn't just sitting there having to pick up the tab for employers and employees in this way. Taking wages out of the competitive process allowed the basis of competition to be done on other bases, that competition would be on the basis of quality of goods, quality standards, that there would be the avoidance of a race to the bottom in employment standards, which would inevitably, as we've seen in more recent times, result in quality control issues and safety issues and so on. So for a long time, as a result of these product market developments and the ability of unions on the one hand and employers on the other to operate as national bodies, national union negotiating bodies and employer national negotiating bodies enjoying national collective bargaining to have industry-wide pay agreements. And this became the main mechanism, especially in Europe, for fixing pay rates, working hours, holiday entitlements, and so on. And they had a whole institutional framework that was underpinned by government support. This was just the way that it was. Now, talking about this in the 21st century seems like talking about an alien world, because of course we don't have anything like this now. Wages are well and truly part of competition. Why did this change? What changed in product markets that shifted this relationship? Now, we'd seen product markets evolve from local to national. They continued to evolve from national to global. And the development of global labour markets and the new entrants into global labour markets, from South America to the Far East, to the old Soviet Union countries, to the Pacific Rim countries, all of these new entrants into the labour market effectively changed the rules of the game. That unions were no longer able to operate on a global scale as they had been able to change their orientation from a local to a national scale. So they couldn't mirror that switch in operation that employers had been able to do. So employers' capital had been able to operate globally quite easily. Labour had not been able to do the same thing. So there was an asymmetry in the power relationship in the product markets now. And so they simply couldn't tie up the whole market. So they were fundamentally undercut by these new entrants into product markets. So national pay bargaining systems collapsed because maintaining relatively generous levels of pay in national labour markets was no longer sustainable when the product markets that supported that had changed fundamentally and was being supplied by much cheaper labour from these new entrants to the global economic system. So we've had this secular change, a complete change in relationship, and it's the growth of globalization that has completely undermined arrangements to national collective pay bargaining that we saw develop over decades. And this underpins an awful lot of union weakness over recent decades. It's not that unions have fallen out of fashion or people don't see the need for unions anymore. It's simply that they can't operate in the way that they've become accustomed to. Their product market orientation had gone away and they weren't able to respond in a new way that fitted the new arrangements.